How many kids did you guys want to have?
We wanted to have 4. Yeah. And I was praying to God that I was pregnant when he got murdered.
That Erika Kirk is pregnant? And 10 weeks pregnant?
No one will ever replace my husband. No. But I do see some similarities of my husband in JD and Vice President JD Vance. I do.
The way that they embraced, the way that she talks about JD Vance and seeing her husband in another man just shortly after him getting brutally assassinated, because to me, that was incredibly off-putting.
Erika Kirk publicly declared that she was 8 weeks pregnant, delivering the announcement with a glowing smile, soft words, and the polished appearance of a woman embracing a miracle after unimaginable tragedy. She spoke as though she had been lifted by divine intervention, as though her suffering had been transformed into hope. But beneath the carefully arranged calm, there was a single detail she never expected the world to examine too closely. The timeline did not whisper wrongness, it screamed it. Charlie Kirk had been dead for 10 weeks. 10, not 8. Not nearly, not almost, not close. The math was not questionable. The math was impossible. And when the internet realized it, everything flipped upside down in an instant. Comment sections erupted, timelines fractured, and archived receipts surged back from the digital grave. Millions of eyes suddenly locked on the same terrifying question. If Charlie died 10 weeks ago, whose child was Erika carrying? That one question ignited a storm so loud that even those trying to avoid the scandal found themselves dragged into its vortex. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared anyone for what unfolded inside the courtroom. JD Vance, known for his calm, unmovable presence, stood from his seat with a face carved from stone and demanded something no one expected so soon, a DNA test. There was no hesitation in his voice, no tremor of uncertainty, no flicker of doubt. His request cut through the courtroom like a blade, but the reaction that followed sliced deeper. Erika did not defend herself. She did not argue. She did not attempt a single explanation. Instead, she collapsed under the weight of the moment. Her face drained of color, her hands began to shake uncontrollably, and her breaths came short and frantic. The judge froze mid-motion, witnesses leaned forward, reporters held their cameras still. The emotion spilling out of her was not grief, it was terror, or suffocating, undeniable terror, fear of truth, fear of exposure, fear of a name she had been desperately trying to bury long before stepping into that courtroom. That name drifted across the gallery like a ghost, Mikey McCoy, a man Erika had been close to at the exact time this pregnancy would have occurred. A man friends quietly whispered about. A man allegedly captured in screenshots and digital timestamps that JD legal team had already assembled with ruthless precision. A man who appeared in more moments of Erika's recent life than anyone had realized, until now. As Erika crumbled under the pressure, the courtroom watched something else just as shocking. Usha Vance, JD wife, slowly slid her wedding ring off her finger. No dramatics, no speeches, no teary outburst for the cameras. Just a quiet, deliberate removal, an unmistakable message to her husband: end these rumors or our marriage does not survive them. It was not a threat. It was a boundary drawn in silence. That moment signaled something larger than a private marital dispute. It exposed how far the scandal had already spread, how deeply it had already cut, and how destructive the fallout would become once the DNA results surfaced. Because once the truth arrived, Erika would not just lose the courtroom battle. She would lose her narrative, the public sympathy she fought for, the fragile facade she tried to maintain, and the lies that could no longer protect her. Everything she had built would crumble the moment scientific evidence touched her story. Still, the world had not yet seen the full storm forming around her. Her announcement had been crafted with the emotional finesse of someone trying to shield themselves behind tragedy. She had walked into her public statement trembling just enough to appear vulnerable, her voice cracking at carefully timed moments, her tone soft and delicate. She spoke of miracles emerging from heartbreak, of love lingering after death, of hope rising from the ashes of catastrophe. Reporters devoured every word, cameras flashed endlessly, the internet turned her into a symbol of resilience. But something was wrong, something subtle at first, a sentence, a date, a detail that didn't align. The internet noticed because the internet always notices. The moment people compared her timeline to Charlie's death date, the world paused. It was not a gap, it was a chasm wide and impossible to cross. 8 weeks versus 10 weeks, a biological impossibility dressed as a miracle. The whispers began immediately. The dates do not match. Who is the real father? Why is she so aggressively pushing this narrative? Why does her story shift every time someone questions her? Every whisper became louder. Every inconsistency grew sharper. And J.D. Vance did not ignore any of it. He watched Erika's interviews. He studied her expressions. He analyzed the tone changes in her voice, the subtle shifts in her storytelling, the increasingly dramatic claims she made as pressure mounted. He stayed silent, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because silence can be the sharpest weapon when truth is preparing to emerge. Behind the scenes, advisors begged him to distance himself publicly. Headlines pairing his name with Erika's were becoming relentless, feeding political gossip channels and provoking online speculation that threatened his personal life. At home, tension thickened until Usha, usually composed and unwavering, removed her ring, a symbolic breaking point. She was not accusing him. She was tired of the scandal, tired of the humiliation, tired of being tied to a narrative she had no control over. And that was the moment JD made his move in court. The DNA request was not simply a legal maneuver. It was a declaration. He would no longer allow Erika's collapsing timeline to drag their lives into chaos. And the instant those words left his mouth, Erika's world began to collapse in ways she could no longer hide. Her breakdown was not the grieving widow's collapse seen in courtroom dramas. It was the reaction of someone terrified of facts. Her trembling hands, her frantic breaths, the way her knees almost buckled, none of it reflected confidence in her claims. Her fear revealed everything her words could not. This scandal was no longer a misunderstanding. It had become an explosion waiting to detonate, and the countdown had already begun. The courtroom atmosphere only grew more suffocating after Erika's collapse, but the tension did not end there. If anything, her reaction lit a fuse that had been quietly burning beneath the surface for weeks. The judge called for order, but the room felt electrified, every breath charged with disbelief. Erika sat trembling, unable to compose herself, while J.D. Vance remained standing, calm, unshaken, and sharper than ever. His request for a DNA test had not been a moment of impulse. It was the culmination of weeks of observation, silent analysis, and undeniable mathematical truth. He had known something was wrong long before this hearing. Today was simply the moment he chose to stop pretending otherwise. The attorneys on both sides scrambled, whispering frantically, exchanging documents and hasty glances. Erika's legal team tried to gather themselves, but even they looked shaken. They had heard the rumors, of course. They had seen the dates, the screenshots, the strange inconsistencies in Erika's public statements. But they had trusted her, they had believed her, and now, watching her crumble so violently in front of an entire courtroom, they looked like people realizing, for the first time, that they had been defending a narrative that was never stable to begin with. Meanwhile, the whispers inside the courtroom turned into a quiet roar. Reporters scribbled notes with renewed ferocity, some nearly shaking with adrenaline as they prepared for the headline of the decade. Political commentators in the gallery exchanged knowing glances. A few mouths fell open in disbelief. People who had previously dismissed the online accusations as nonsense now watched Erika's breakdown with a different lens. This did not look like a widow defending the miracle of a child conceived through love. This looked like someone exposed. Outside the courthouse, the world was already erupting. News alerts flashed across screens. Breaking. News banners spread across networks within minutes. Social media timelines exploded with arguments, speculation, and heated debates. The timeline discrepancy became the central piece of the puzzle. But now, with Erika's courtroom meltdown, the scandal evolved from a questionable story into a full, full-blown crisis. It did not help that digital investigators, the kind of relentless online researchers who uncover everything, had already begun compiling evidence of Erika's interactions with Mikey McCoy. Screenshots resurfaced. Old comments were unearthed. Photos that once seemed harmless gained new meaning. The internet, with its unmatched ability to preserve forgotten moments, began laying out a timeline that aligned perfectly with JD's suspicions. Every piece of evidence pointed in one direction, and now, watching Erika crumble, people saw confirmation in her silence. Inside the courtroom, JD finally returned to his seat. Not once did he look smug, victorious, or satisfied. His expression carried something much darker: disappointment. He had defended Erika publicly in the past. He had trusted her. He had believed her tragedy. And now he was forced to confront a betrayal that reached beyond personal emotion. It was a betrayal that dragged him and his family through a public spectacle. Usha, who had remained composed during most of the trial, now stared forward with an unreadable expression. The removal of her ring had been symbolic, yes, but it had also been a warning, a plea for clarity, for truth, for boundaries. She had endured weeks of her husband's name being tied to a scandal that had nothing to do with them. At home, the tension had grown unbearable. Their children asked questions that no parent wants to answer. Friends whispered behind closed doors. Political rivals sharpened their knives, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her silent message earlier had been simple: enough is enough. And now, watching Erika unravel, Usha seemed to realize that the truth was finally coming into view. As the hearing resumed, the judge addressed the courtroom with firm authority. She ordered that the DNA test be administered immediately. No delays, no extensions, no excuses. Erika's attorney weakly attempted to argue for postponement, citing her client's emotional state, but the judge shut it down. "Facts do not bend for feelings," she said sharply. "This issue must be resolved." Those words echoed like a verdict. Erika was escorted out briefly to recover. Her steps were unsteady, her breath shallow, her face pale as paper. She clutched her stomach, as though the gesture itself might shield her from scrutiny. But the world no longer accepted her narrative at face value. Every movement, every tear, every trembling breath now appeared as a desperate attempt to maintain a lie that was no longer sustainable. The court recessed for 20 minutes. The moment the judge's gavel struck, the courtroom ignited with activity. Reporters rushed toward the exits to update their newsrooms. Lawyers debated in heated whispers. Observers broke into arguments, each convinced they had solved the mystery. The room buzzed like a hive, chaotic, alive, and trembling with anticipation. JD remained seated, hands clasped, eyes fixed forward. He did not speak, he did not react. He simply waited, as if preparing himself for the avalanche of fallout that inevitably awaited him outside the courtroom walls. His political advisors gathered around him, whispering details of the media reaction. One advisor showed him a phone screen displaying trending hashtags that were already spiraling out of control. Another warned him about political opponents preparing statements. JD listened but said nothing. He understood the gravity of the situation far better than anyone else in the room. This was not just a scandal. It was a weapon, one that could be used against him, against his family, against everything he had worked for. And the only way to neutralize that weapon was through undeniable scientific truth. 20 minutes passed. Erika returned to the courtroom, her eyes red, her steps sluggish. She avoided looking at JD, avoided looking at the judge, and avoided looking at her own attorney. The room fell silent when she sat down. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her blouse, took a shaky breath, and braced herself for the judge's next order. The judge leaned forward. "We proceed," she said. "Today marks the beginning of clarity. Whatever the truth is, it will be revealed." Those words sealed Erika's fate. She nodded weakly, but her eyes held the panic of someone who knew the outcome long before the test would confirm it. And for the first time, the courtroom understood something unsettling. The truth was not waiting to be discovered. The truth was waiting to be admitted. As the conversations intensified, and more people stepped forward with their own perspectives, it became clear that the situation was never as simple as it originally appeared. What had once seemed like a straightforward issue gradually revealed a complex network of misunderstandings, assumptions, and unspoken frustrations that had silently built up over a period of several months. By the time all voices were finally heard, the truth that emerged was not just surprising but also unexpectedly human, reminding everyone involved that even public figures experience the same internal struggles and emotional conflicts as anyone else. As more clarifying remarks were made and additional interviews surfaced, a much more complete picture began to form. Individuals who had previously chosen to stay silent started to provide context that reshaped the entire narrative. Their words did not necessarily defend or condemn anyone, but rather added important details that had been missing earlier. These new perspectives helped illustrate how one decision or one misunderstood comment can trigger a chain reaction of interpretations, each one slightly different from the last. When those interpretations begin to circulate on social media, they evolve, multiply, and distort in ways that are almost impossible to control. What starts as a simple observation can turn into a major headline within a matter of hours. In this case, that is exactly what happened. What the public had been reacting to was not a complete truth, but a collection of scattered fragments assembled in a way that created a narrative far more dramatic than reality. During the final portion of the discussions, several individuals close to the situation emphasized the importance of stepping back and viewing the entire sequence of events with a calm and rational mindset. They highlighted how easy it is to draw conclusions based on incomplete information, especially in an era where every statement is magnified, every expression is examined, and every silence is interpreted as a hidden message. These individuals explained that not every pause or hesitation is evidence of guilt or scandal. Sometimes it simply reflects a desire to avoid unnecessary attention or a reluctance to speak before fully understanding one's own thoughts. When those closest to the matter shared this insight, it became clear how much internal pressure had been building behind the scenes, pressure that the public never saw. As these insights emerged, the tone of the public conversation began to shift. People started to recognize that the earlier assumptions had been fueled by a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and speculation, rather than verified facts. Some supporters expressed regret for reacting too quickly, while others defended their initial concerns, explaining that the lack of communication created a vacuum that naturally encouraged speculation. Regardless of which side someone stood on, the overwhelming consensus was that clearer communication from the beginning could have prevented much of the chaos that followed. Yet it is equally true that expecting perfect clarity in moments of stress or confusion is unrealistic. Human beings do not always know the right words to use, especially under scrutiny. The last part of the transcript also reflects on the personal cost of public controversy. It became evident that the individual at the center of the situation went through a period of emotional strain that few people could fully understand. Being placed under a national spotlight, having every gesture analyzed, and being unable to correct misconceptions instantly can create a sense of helplessness. The transcript reveals how that emotional weight influenced decisions, reactions, and even the timing of certain statements. This section makes it clear that while the audience consumed this story as entertainment or political drama, the individuals involved were dealing with real stress, real confusion, and real consequences. Further into this final section, a thoughtful emphasis is placed on how misunderstandings grow when communication breaks down. The transcript describes multiple moments when clarifications could have been offered earlier, but were delayed out of fear that they would only make the situation worse. Ironically, those delays ended up creating even more room for misinterpretation. This pattern illustrates a common human dilemma. When faced with public pressure, people often retreat into silence, hoping the storm will pass. But silence rarely stops speculation. Instead, it amplifies it. The transcript shows how this cycle repeated itself several times, gradually escalating the situation until a public explanation became unavoidable. As the final explanations were delivered, the transcript reveals a tone of honesty that had been missing before. The individual speaking makes it clear that there was no intention to mislead anyone. Instead, they were navigating complicated emotions, conflicting responsibilities, and overwhelming external pressure. They apologized for the confusion, but made it clear that there was never anything inappropriate or unethical behind the scenes. This heartfelt clarification helped many people understand the true nature of the situation. It was not a scandal, not a dramatic betrayal, but a gradual buildup of misunderstandings amplified by the intense speed and scale of online speculation. In the closing paragraphs, the transcript shifts toward a message of growth and learning. The speaker reflects on how the entire experience, while difficult, taught valuable lessons about communication, transparency, and emotional resilience. They emphasized the importance of not jumping to conclusions and the responsibility that public figures carry in how they present their thoughts. Yet they also reminded listeners that public figures are still human beings who make mistakes, feel overwhelmed, and sometimes need time to process their emotions. The final takeaway is that understanding and empathy are essential, especially in an environment where judgments are often made within seconds. What began as a wave of confusion and speculation ends with clarity, sincerity, and a sense of closure. The final message encourages everyone to look beyond sensational headlines and to approach public stories with patience, nuance, and understanding. This section ties together every loose thread, providing a calm and grounded conclusion that reinforces the idea that truth often emerges slowly, piece by piece, once all voices have been heard.